right. Looks like it is time to rock and roll. So welcome everyone. We're so glad that you are joining us here for this conversation about Sunday school. My name is Charity, and I am a former children's ministry director. And now I'm a member of Group's editorial team and am the managing editor for Group's new Simply Loved Sunday school curriculum. And I think that before we dive into our conversation today, we need to give ourselves a collective pat on the back and even an air high five. Go ahead and give that air high five, because friends, we have been through a lot over the past 4 months. And church as we know it has just changed really significantly. But there's good news, because God has not changed. And his love for kids and their families hasn't changed either. And it seems like with every challenge, there comes opportunity and a chance for us to lean on God's faithfulness and his goodness as we move forward. So today, here in this webinar, we just want to take some time to look back on how God has faithfully led and inspired and guided 3 ministry leader friends as they have continued to serve kids and families through Sunday school and children's ministry programming. So we'll look back a little bit, and then let's look forward. Let's look ahead to how God will continue to faithfully guide our steps into the fall. But first, let's pause and thank God for his presence with us right now too. Would you join me in prayer? God, thank you so much for your love for us. Thank you that you are in control and that you are unchanging. We look to you now, God, for your guidance, for your wisdom. I thank you for the ministry leaders that are a part of this conversation and a part of this webinar. I just ask that your presence would be felt in our hearts and our minds. I thank you for the way that you will guide this conversation. And we give you all the glory and praise today, Jesus. In your name I pray. Amen. All right, well, let's begin by meeting our panelists. So I would love for you friends to share your name, a little bit about your church and the curriculum that you use, perhaps, since this is a Sunday school webinar after all. And give us a quick overview of how your children's ministry has adapted during this pandemic. That's a lot for the first question, but I think it'll help us to get to know each other a little bit fast. So Becky, let's start with you.
Hey everyone, my name is Becky Chaplin, and I'm the director of kids ministry at a church in Denver, Colorado. And we use the Dig In program during our school year. During the summer, we use Vacation Bible School programming that I spread throughout the summer. This year, because we can't really travel outside, we're traveling through God's Word, from rocky railway trains to planes in the sky. So that's been a really fun rendition for that. But throughout the school year, we've typically used the Dig In series, which we really love. And when the pandemic began, we shifted all of our kids' church programming to be an online video format where kids and families would watch together, and then they would be able to pause and talk about the questions together as a family, or be able to do an activity together. And it's really cool just taking those experiences that are such a key part of Dig In or VBS and turn them into experiences at home instead of at kids' church. So we've really loved switching to what we can do during this time.
That's great. Thanks, Becky. Sounds like you've been busy.
Yeah, just a little.
How about you, Sharon? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I have been in children's ministry for 30 years, and I am the preschool pastor at our church in Lake Elmo, Minnesota. And we truthfully had one weekend, the weekend of March 13th, that we had no kids ministry because our governor shut us down on Saturday, and then Sunday was coming. So that weekend we had nothing for kids, but pulled together an online worship service. And then for all of the weeks since then, we've been modifying our curriculum. So we use play and worship curriculum in our twos room. We use groups Dig In our preschool through 3rd grade, and then our 4th and 5th graders use groups Be Bold curriculum. And so we have rolled out each weekend then 4 different lessons because we've been doing the plain worship for our 2s, the preschool version, elementary version, and then the Be Bold for our 4th and 5th graders. So we've been really busy. One thing that we've learned is that maybe not doing so many age levels might have been a little bit better approach, but that's where we started and that's where we have stuck. And we have provided online experiences and then the at-home guides for the families to be engaged with. So there's been a teaching presence with myself or Pastor Wendy or another volunteer, and then experiences to reinforce the learning with kids at home, and then something for families to do during the week from that. And we've even sent home some family activity packs, which have been a highlight. So.
Wow. So a little something for everyone there, not leaving anyone out of the fun of learning about Jesus at home. That's neat. Wendy, how about you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your church and what you've been doing over the past 4 months.
Well, I'm Wendy. I've been in children's ministry for over 20 years. And right now, our church is in Weddington, North Carolina. We are very small. Very small. And I am using the Be Bold curriculum. And I actually modify and use it for grades 1 through 6th grade.
Wow.
So when some of our students don't automatically go to youth in 6th grade, and they'll stay with me. So I use this curriculum. It started with 2 students every Sunday. That was my class. And then when COVID hit and everybody had to close, in North Carolina we had to close, I started doing Zoom with the students, and our Sunday school class actually grew. We actually grew to 12 students, which we've never had with that age group in our church. And I ended up holding 2 Zoom meetings a week. So I did split the ages and had the younger ones meet on Sunday evenings, and then I met with the older ones on Wednesday evenings. And we did that until June, and our church reopened in June. And so we are now back at our church as long as nothing else changes here in North Carolina. I'm not sure what will happen there. If we do get closed again, we will definitely go back to doing this on Zoom, because it is very possible to modify activities and crafts. I actually drove around and delivered craft supplies to the students.
Wow, that is amazing. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of those details of adaptations and how do you even know where to start to continue to minister to kids and families now. But it seems like at group, as we've reached out to children's ministry leaders like the 3 of you and like our friends who are watching with us today, we've noticed that a lot of people have done kind of a version of one of 3 things. So when COVID-19 changed the church's reality, some people chose to just stop doing children's ministry, to put it on pause. Some continued, but stopped using their regularly scheduled curriculum. They picked up other resources along the way to use during that time. And then others, like the 3 of you, chose to continue and press forward with the curriculum in creative ways. So those were some of the trends we saw. But we actually would love to know, for all of you who are watching now, let's actively participate here in this webinar a little bit. We're going to throw a poll up, and we would love to hear from you. What has your church been doing over the past 4 months? What's your approach been? We have a poll that will come up, and here are your options. So conducting live lessons via Zoom, kind of like what Wendy mentioned. Pre-recording lessons for your kids to watch at home, taught by someone at your church. That's kind of like what Becky and Sharon mentioned. Maybe sharing a pre-recorded video lesson from an outside resource provider. At group, we had done Empowering Courageous Kids videos, and we know that churches enjoyed using those during the time. Maybe sending lessons at home for parents to lead, to equip them, or meeting in person with some or all age levels. Wendy mentioned that her church is kind of transitioning back to that, kind of practicing physical distancing, the safety precautions, and all of those things that come with our new reality. Or pausing children's ministry for the time being, or maybe there's another that we haven't thought of. So go ahead, and I see your responses coming in, and it's really interesting as we watch. It's kind of consistent with what we're finding, a little bit of everything. Yeah. It's so interesting to see that in this scenario that we find ourselves in, it's not a one size fits all kind of situation, depending where you live, depending on your state guidelines, your county guidelines. Things just change so rapidly. So thanks for sharing and giving us that insight. You know, I am curious for Becky and Sharon and Wendy. I'm wondering, why was it important for you and your churches or your Sunday school classes to continue to create experiences for children in your church? Becky, will you start us off? Why was it important for you to do something?
I really thought that everything in all of our lives was changing so fast. You know, a lot of us didn't have a lot of time, like Sharon was saying, like to even think through everything that was going to change. It just all happened so quickly. And so I think for me and for our church, we wanted to provide the most familiar setting for these kids. They've already had school change on them. A lot of their home lives were changing. Now mom and dad are back at home with them, or whatever their family situation looks like. And so we wanted to keep a familiar face that they would see on Sunday mornings if they were here, just like they would be on a normal Sunday. And so we would film kids' church as it normally happened in our kids' space so that the kids could see like the environment that they would normally see. And for me, it was important to still maintain that relationship with them, to be able to engage with them just like I would if I was seeing them live, but knowing that they were on the other side of that camera, hearing what we were sharing with them about God's love. So that was really important to me, to keep that comfort for them, because everything else is changing. And I think for us as kids ministry leaders, we were also experiencing so much change. And so for me, it made sense to not have to change my curriculum, to kind of stay on the plan that I was at, which was with the epic teachings of Dig In. And we were right in the middle of the armor of God, and I wanted to continue that theme, and the kids had already started diving in, so we wanted to keep going. Like, I know everything else on your world is changing, but let's remember why God doesn't change, and we'll stay right here learning that way. So it was really important to keep that comfort level for them and that familiar face.
Yeah, I love that your relationship with those kids and families kind of fueled that vision that you set. And, you know, we think that we've experienced a lot of change, and we have, but goodness, kids really have too, right alongside. So giving that familiarity to kids is important.
Yeah.
Sharon, how about you?
Well, kind of along the same lines, we were wanting to provide that consistency for kids, because everything that they knew as routine, nothing was routine. It was all so different. And we wanted to, especially, you know, serving in the area of early childhood, we know that kids thrive on routine and they need that. And so we wanted to provide consistency in their lives, much like with Becky. We did all of our filming at church, and we'd say, we're in your room today, or we're in your space, and saying hi to some of the toys and some of their familiar things. But also we were in the middle of using Dig In with, and we were in the Lord's Prayer. So we thought, we just can't stop in the middle of the Lord's Prayer and not give them the rest of the story. And so, you know, we really felt we wanted to continue with that. But I also have a, you know, having been in ministry for 30 years, I have a real strong feeling that we need to be able to tell our parents what we're trying, what biblical truths we are teaching to kids, what our scope and sequence is, that there's intentionality in our ministry. And whether that is face-to-face or through a Zoom screen or an online recording, we can still do that. It just looks differently. And so we wanted to keep, you know, the promise to our parents of what we said we were going to be teaching their kids this year, and be really consistent with that, and also to be developmentally appropriate. That's really important too, because not all kids can learn the same thing in the same way. What we do with our 2-year-olds is very different than what we do with our 5th graders, for instance. And so to be able to have, you know, age appropriate learning, because what we did know is that our adult service was not designed for kids in mind all the time, and to have something that was age appropriate for kids that still helped them grow in their friendship with Jesus was really important. And for it to be fun, because learning about Jesus needs to be fun.
Agreed. Yeah, it seems like as churches are thinking about reopening and doing services with families all together, that's wonderful for a lot of reasons. But it doesn't take away from the fact that kids, there's a reason for Sunday school to begin with, to help to meet kids right where they are with Jesus' love. So very nice. Wendy, I'm curious, why did you think it was important to continue your Be Bold class with just 2 kids at the time? Why did you keep going?
Well, I don't like to give up. And one of the things that God had been putting on my heart for a very long time was a conversational based curriculum. And so when you all came up with this program, it was an answer to prayer. It really was. And so we already had the 2 students, and they were siblings, but they still loved coming. They loved coming up there. We would have a little bit of a breakfast together. We'd have fruits and muffins or something together, and then we would jump right in. And the conversations, it was the conversations, them wanting to learn more. It was that they wanted to know God. They wanted to get him to know him better. They wanted to have that relationship with him. And it was the same thing that Becky said. It was familiar. I didn't want them to lose that this was familiar to them. And, you can have a conversation anywhere. And that's how this curriculum was based. And so it offered them some security and stability during a time that didn't feel very secure or stable. And I wanted them to know that we loved them, that God loved them, that he hasn't abandoned us during this time, that he's still there, he's present, and he always will be. He never breaks his promises. And so we actually had time each week that we met that we talked about that. So it was just a great experience in a bad situation, if that makes any sense at all. And just, I didn't want them to feel like they had been forgotten.
Yeah, I love that. And with Be Bold specifically, it really is based around kids' questions about faith. And
Yes.
If those conversations are happening, you want to keep them going because you care about the kids and you see how important it is. Well, as you were sharing, Wendy, I saw a little mention in our chat about how parents potentially could be a little zoomed out right now. School is zooming and all of the zooming happening. So it leads perfectly into my next question. So thank you for bringing that up, friend. I want to know, how have your efforts been received by kids and their families? So whether it's a Zoom call, a video that they're watching, do you have any good stories to share with us about impact with kids and families? Becky, we'll start with you again.
Yeah, I have really heard, I think, more feedback from families now that we've switched to Kids Church being a pre-recorded video so that they would watch it on their own time at home when they were ready, which was, I think, really crucial at the beginning of quarantine when everyone was all of a sudden at home and looking for things to do. So, please give me any content to watch with my child, especially content that they know and trust is coming from a safe place, a loving place, and is going to teach them faith. And so we had a lot of families text me and email me and be excited to participate together as a family, whether that was an object lesson, a science experiment. They really loved those because they could see the big wow happen on camera, but then they could also replicate it at home, which turned out really well. We've tried to take any interactive experience and use it for a kid to a parent. So we did the story of John and Peter healing the lame beggar. That was part of Rocky Railway. And the original curriculum was talking about having crews take the smallest member of their crew and carry them with a blanket across the room. And so we just adapted that, did the same experience, but said, how can we do this at home? And so I said, the smallest member of your family has to be the one that you carry across the room. And I had a mom text me after that her little son, Eli, was thrilled that he got to be the chosen one that was carried on the blanket across the room. And what I love about that is Eli's 4 years old. And now every time he hears that story, he's going to remember looking up and seeing his mom and dad and 2 brothers carrying him across the living room every time he reads that story from now on. And so it's just cool that that family bonding is happening. They're looking for things to do. And this is a way to encourage faith in them together as a family to start opening those discussions so that faith isn't taboo anymore. So it's been really cool to see families wanting to participate and learning how to do it in a not so scary way, because we all kind of got thrown into it. And if you say, all right, we're going to do this as a family, then let's all try this together and see how it goes. We know that other families are engaging in this way too. So I think it was a really kind of easing them in a little bit to what it looks like for families to have these conversations at home, but do it in a fun way. Like, what's Miss Becky going to tell us that we need this week? You know, go get salt, go get a hat, go get a blanket. I mean, all these little props that you can use that they have at home was really received well, I think, by families, which was awesome.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
I remember as a children's ministry leader trying to solve the puzzle of family ministry. And we talk and we you know, kind of vision cast of how do we really connect with families and how can we help them foster faith at home. And wow, God gave us an opportunity to do that in this pandemic. And it's neat to hear stories like that of parents engaging with kids. Sharon, have you had similar experiences? What stories do you have to tell us?
You know, one of the kind of eye-opening things was because we did 2-year-olds and preschool and elementary and then our preteens, they were like, wow, you guys do all this on a weekend for our kids. Like, their eyes were so open, because if they go up to adult service and they're not in that, they're like, didn't have a pulse on the depth of what we do with kids and how hands-on learning is and just interactive and everything. And so that was an eye-opening thing. And just the, you know, parents, because we did all the different ages, it was a little tricky because all of their kids wanted to do all of their lessons. I had one family who had all 4 ages, said, we do church all day long. And then we made a little tweak and released our lessons sooner so they could kind of do it more at their leisure. But just that hands-on learning experience has really been an awakening in families and parents more becoming the teachers, and we're becoming more like the coach alongside the parents versus, you know, the roles are flipping a little bit. People loved when we sent things in the mail to go home. That was like an old school thing, to get some art supplies to create something or something to go with an object lesson was a really fun, engaging way. And we did, you know, keep track of our video views and stuff, but I will say they were definitely higher earlier on, and it did kind of go down a little bit, but then it kind of depended, like after like Easter, there was a little bit of a lull, and then when school got out, now the video watching went up a little bit more. And so it's, you know, been a little up and down, I think, showing some of the being zoomed out a little bit, but the fact that they could watch it anytime during that week, I think provided an opportunity that's really unlike if you come on a Sunday morning and you literally have that 1 hour when you can participate. So overall, we've been reaching more kids because we've been able to have it available longer than just those 2 hours on a Sunday morning, depending on what session they would attend.
Yeah, with every challenge comes opportunities, and having parents engage and having that longevity of time that kids can view. You know, with Simply Loved, the new curriculum that group just introduced, we really wanted to do some tweaks and tips to help people use Simply Loved in these times. And so we pulled together our own Zoom call with some awesome kiddos from families that I once worked with in Pennsylvania. And it was a fun call. We had an aha because we decided to go preschool and elementary together, because I knew that the little siblings were going to be there anyway and they were going to want to watch. And we found that it was difficult with that age range, because the preschoolers, it was a little bit more difficult to keep them engaged. And with the elementary kids, we couldn't ask the depth of questions that we had written for elementary with the littles nearby. So our aha was that we would probably do 2 separate age levels. And because a mom was right there on the Zoom call, she chimed in and said, you know, this doesn't all have to happen on a Sunday. We could watch the service or go to the service if churches are reopening and having family services. What if you did preschool on a Tuesday and elementary on a Thursday? And it was like, oh, this all doesn't have to happen on a Sunday right now. We can spread it out. And I think the key is communicating with families and asking what works for them. Are you Zoomed out? Maybe you think they are and they're not. They're looking for opportunities. So just a reminder that keep that communication open with families. That's key all the time, and especially now. Wendy, how about you? What any stories or reactions from kids or their families? What about those kids who joined your Zoom call that hadn't been a part of your church leading up till then?
So the families loved it. They really, once again, with our church being so small, they really didn't expect or anticipate that we would be doing anything for the kids or the youth, but we did. And they were very happy, and it was very well received. You could see them; they would peek their heads in every now and then to see what was going on the Zoom call. But I think more specifically, we had a family that was visiting our church. They'd been twice before we had to close, and the kids loved being there, and so they did join us for most of the Zoom calls through that time. And so that there was the other students were some that we had 2 other new families that had just started attending our church and had just started coming to Sunday school. And so it's like it grew very quickly when we opened up Zoom. And there were 3 students, they never came to Sunday school. And so as a result of having Zoom, they now have been coming occasionally since we reopened. They've been there about every other week. And that was one of the things that I think probably touched me the most, was that this girl, she was 3rd grade. And when she was in children's church during our service, would hardly ever speak. She just sat there usually with one of her brothers and was quiet. And she came out of her shell. Mm-hmm. And I'm really going to try not to cry about this. And she started talking, asking questions, answering questions. And there was one night that everybody told me they weren't going to be able to make it. And because I always, reached out to them first to make sure who was going to be there, and I'd send out the information, and nobody was going to be able to make it. So we didn't have the call. Well, she tried to get on anyway, and she sat there for 30 minutes waiting for me, and I wasn't there because it was the only night we canceled. So let me just say that I never canceled again. And the next week it was just she and I, and it was the most amazing class that I've had in a long time, just sitting and listening to this little girl that usually wouldn't speak when she was in church. And one other story was, I'm so thankful that I continued this because God always knows. He always knows, and you need to listen to him. One of my students had a family member who had attempted suicide, and she didn't know how to talk to this person. And one of our lessons of the question was on suicide. And she went to her mom afterwards, and her mom came to me in tears, was just so thankful that this opened that door for them to be able to sit down and talk about it. And she asked a lot of questions about the suicide hotline number. And so it just, God uses any situation, any circumstance, and you just have to listen. And when you think that things are at their worst, they're not. Yeah. It's like a flower came out of that. But it's been really wonderful to see his hand in this throughout this whole time, in circumstances that most of us have never experienced before. So I say, don't give up.
Those are powerful stories, Wendy. Thank you so much for sharing that. It reminds me of something that senior pastor that I worked with once would say. He said, God is always at work.
Yes.
And sometimes we just have to look for them. And it reminds me, Becky, of you. I asked you what the flags were behind you, and those are your God sightings banners that you use with kids.
Yeah, every summer we write these little God sighting flags, and each week the kids write how they personally saw that Bible point in their life. So when we learned about how to be bold, they wrote how can they be bold in their faith, and how does Jesus give them hope. And it was just a really cool way we have our summer camp is on site, not through our church, but through our school summer camp. And we have a virtual opening worship. And so this was just a fun way for me to stay connected with them, even though they were watching me online. They were able to personally write, this is how I saw God in my life. And that's just really cool. And I mean, the answers, I think, for all of us are changing. I mean, it's like God will get us through this pandemic. I mean, to hear that from the voice, the handwriting of a 7-year-old, like, God gives me hope through COVID-19. That's like eye-opening. Like this will affect these kids in their Sunday school answers for the rest of their lives. And so how can we share Jesus's hope with them to know God will pull me through this, just like he's pulled us through every single piece of our lives. So it's been cool to see how they're still finding faith and hope and God's love, even in the midst of a pandemic.
And that is our why. Like, there are so many logistics. There are so many things to think through. And even now, as I'm glancing at the chat, you guys are talking about experiences and things. But what Becky just mentioned and the stories that Wendy and Sharon, that's our why. Because kids' relationship with Jesus is still growing. And we still get to be a part of it as we do things creatively. And speaking of creativity, let's talk curriculum. Now, you've mentioned some of the curriculum that you've used, but it probably wasn't developed. Actually, speaking as an editor of Simply Loved, I know it was not developed for these specific times. So how have you continued to use your curriculum? What have you adapted? What are some tips that you would share with others when adapting curriculum for these times? Becky, let's start with you again.
Yeah, I think with Dig In specifically, there's the activity blocks on the side that have games, crafts, object lessons, talk about videos, and the core Bible, all sorts of different activities you can choose from. And part of my weekly routine as I was planning the lessons anyway was to go through and kind of pick and choose what I wanted for each week, which was nice to have that variety and those options. So that was part of my normal routine, to just read through the lessons, right? But as we switched to online videos, when I went through each of those activity blocks, I really had to wear a different lens, like a camera lens, to see how will this translate to video. Thankfully, a lot of those lessons are written to be those experiences, so I could take the core Bible experience that they were going to do on site and just kind of transfer it to being together as a family, which worked out really well for the families to have different props and things like that they already owned at home, and then to be able to provide a chance to pause, do this activity, and then come back to me and we'll talk about it, which worked out really well. Another thing that I loved were the talk about videos, because I think it helps to not have it just be me talking the whole time. Like, I can talk about Jesus forever, I would love to, but I know that kids, I don't want them to start tuning Miss Becky out. So it was nice to be able to throw to something else. Like, here's how this kid that's your age lived out his faith. Let's watch this video. So I could throw to that, come back, and then we talk about it. We also love Bible buddies, and especially with Rocky Railway and Sky, which is what we do during the summer. And I know with Simply Loved, it's so nice. Kids identify with characters. And like, if I'm holding a little stuffed animal Bible buddy in my hand, kids are like engaged immediately. So they care a lot more about what I'm saying if I'm holding a little Orville the pig with me. So it's been really cool to be able to throw to a Bible buddy video, so that now they have this character teaching them the same point that I am, but just coming from a different voice, coming with cool animal footage and things like that. Kids really relate to that. So I think it helps to kind of have different creative experiences, not just me talking, not just an experience that they're doing at home with a prop or a science experiment, but like a fun, engaging video. Also worship music videos. Kids love singing and dancing, and it gets them up on their feet, and they'll remember those songs too. So it's cool to see how you can pick and choose the different activity blocks or Bible buddies that work for you and your kids and adapt it to more of a camera lens.
Yeah. So you're thinking through the supplies in terms of what families might already have available and using the different pieces of your curriculum strategically. So the video components. Dig In has music videos that come with it. So just including what you would typically do in your curriculum online, and that's so helpful. Sharon, how about you? What are some tips you have for adapting? You've been doing a lot of videos for different ages. What have you learned?
So one of the things, again, using Dig In as for a lot of the ages, we always would do core Bible. That was always going to be a given, but we also had decided early on that because we were doing multiple ages, we didn't want any video segment to be more than a 30-minute, including like the worship and all that kind of stuff. And so we would go off of the core Bible and always have at least one way to reinforce the activity at home. And often we would take the games because the games didn't have a lot of supplies, or if there were supplies, they were easy to gather, things that most families would have at home. And so we would just tweak the game activity or maybe an object lesson. So there's always one way to reinforce it. And the other piece, along with in the preschool area, now Pastor Wendy at my church does elementary, so she would tweak those lessons. We always did the puppet for preschool. And so my husband, Mr. Shane, has done now 18 weeks of the Theo the puppet with me, and the kids loved that. And because every week Theo would interact with the kids, he would talk directly to the kids. I mean, he's kind of built up his own little thing now with these preschoolers, which is pretty sweet. But we also every week would use the family take-home sheet, which again, for all the ages, preschool through your elementary age, have the same synopsis and just a simple activity, because we learned early on our parents were overwhelmed. They became teachers, they were working from home, everybody was under a roof, and sometimes it was just too much to do everything. And so then we said, just focus on that family take-home sheet. There's a little devotion, there's an activity to do, something you can be praying about. And we just said, you know what, keep it simple. And so we tried to give families options, but the real learning philosophy that's woven into groups' curriculums really made it quite easy to just be able to pick and tweak a part of a lesson that you were going to use and then do the video recording. And probably the biggest tip is, if you are still recording lessons, you just have to imagine that your kids are there, you're engaging, you're exciting. We started some traditions that we would do every week. Like we have a prayer transition with preschoolers that we do every week. I had families telling me, Miss Sharon, we can no longer pray ever at our house unless we do open, shut them, give a little, it's like this whole thing. So creating some rhythms with families has been really fun too. But again, just looking at, what is the most important segment that you want to communicate with your kids and families through that lesson, and don't try to do all of it. I mean, if you were going to use Dig In, you would have like up to over 2 hours, but that's not realistic. But just adapt it and keep it simple.
And in these times, especially, less is more. I love that you're keeping attention spans in mind and strategically choosing activities that are doable and would be beneficial for families now. And I love that it's bringing your family together in cool ways too. That's so neat. Wendy, I know that you have gone above and beyond to deliver supplies and bags and things to kids with your Be Bold lessons. What's that been like, and how have you kind of sustained that?
Well, once again, our church is small. If you had a larger church, one of the things that I would recommend is if you are still meeting online and you wanted to be able to supply things that they wouldn't readily have available at home, is you can have a meeting point. You can meet at the church and pass out the supplies that way. But it was nice, in a time that we weren't really having a lot of contact with people. So it was really nice seeing the parents, seeing the kids, even at our distance, the social distancing, but just standing in the front yard and chatting for 20 minutes. So I think it was really beneficial and to have that one-on-one or the one-on-three. My daughter helped me a lot doing that. And it was such a great experience, because when we did the curriculum, we did the Be Bold, we would actually sit and do the crafts together through Zoom. Who thought that was even possible? So we really enjoyed that. They had a good time doing that. So I would say it's really thinking outside the box. I know there's always that question of the group activities, and all, in Sunday school and children's church curriculum is centered around, group activities. It's not usually individual, and it's praying over and thinking about what can you do to make this happen. And I love what I know Becky was talking about, and Sharon is, when you're involving the parents in this. And with the Be Bold curriculum, it was actually easy to adapt, I think. The activities, we had one where it involved juggling with one another. So we just juggled independently, and it was rather hilarious. And I juggled with them, and they did much better than I did. So seeing me goof off was very helpful and not be able to do things as well as they did. And even when things were a race, when you were generally racing as a group activity, we actually had one with balloons, and they had to see what team could pop them the quickest. So we did individual. I sent balloons home. They blew them up, and they raced to see who could pop them the fastest. And one of them actually finally confessed when we met back together. He said, "I hid them." He put himself on mute and he hid them so he could play with them later. But it's really adapting, and a lot of things you can adapt where it's individual and you can kind of race together. Yes, on Zoom, I use the whiteboard and the screen sharing with Zoom. And so if you were like having to set up a maze for the kids to work through or lead each other through, if it was a lesson that involved an activity like that, I actually would find a maze online and put it up on the screen, and they would use the annotating, and all of them would come in together and race to see who could find their way through the maze the fastest. So it's a lot of thinking outside the box, prayerfully thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
And everybody enjoyed it. I would continue doing it that way.
Yeah.
But see, I guess for me, I've been accustomed to adapting those group activities because we've always had a very small Sunday school class. So I've been adapting activities for almost 3 years.
You've developed that skill over time, and it came in handy now.
Yes, it did. It was perfect.
So a little bit of creativity, a little bit of adaptations, and a lot of relationship is what I'm hearing from you, Wendy. The relationship driven. Maybe we don't need to attack every single piece of this lesson exactly as written. Maybe it's more important to spend time together and to talk together and to pray together and to laugh together right now, which is so true. Well, I would like to pivot our conversation a little bit. I'd like to look forward to the months ahead. And it feels like there is still a lot of uncertainty and a lot to figure out. But I'm noticing as I'm reading articles and seeing things posted online that schools are starting to really intentionally formulate plans for what reopening in the fall could look like. And children's ministries may be beginning or already starting to do the same. So my question to you three, how is your church planning to approach reopening? What are some of the things that you're considering and communicating with families? So Becky, let's start with you again.
Yeah, so we are looking right now, we've just started the conversations of what it looks like to reopen back on site. But we know that family units have to stay together. So we are deciding for moving forward, as our church begins to open up on site, we would do an outdoor service, but we would not have a kids' church component on site because kids need to stay with their family units. And we typically have dismissed them from like starting in worship with their families and then coming to us. And so to kind of keep family units together, we've decided that when our church is on site for the time being, we'll continue doing our online kids' church videos. We've seen success with that as a church and as kids' church. So it's something that we are planning on doing even when we're back on site doing live kids' church, that I'll continue to do a video. And the main reason for that is they've been really easy for families to share. I had a mom tell me that during this entire pandemic, they had a family that they were friends with who were Hindu, and their kids were really struggling with the pandemic, and they shared our kids' church videos with them. And the little boy said that he felt like we were talking just to him. And I think that is such a testament to how a camera experience can actually be a benefit, because instead it wasn't just Miss Becky talking to a group of 50 kids and saying, God loves you. It was Becky saying, God loves you, like to that child. And so I think we've seen a really cool kind of surprising benefit of being able to talk directly to the camera. So we want to continue that, even moving to on-site. When the time comes that we can come back inside instead of just doing an outside service, we will talk about doing a family-centered worship experience, because families have to stay within their family unit already. We've started having the conversation of what could that look like to take what our kids' church videos have been, doing a little bit of a teaching, now pause and do this with your family. Now you're just going to be in church together. Let's pause and do this activity right here, right now, so we can teach you how to read the Bible together as a family. And we can teach you how to pray together as a family, so that when you're doing it at home, it's not so scary. And so we're really excited. We're just starting those conversations of when we move to on-site, how can we kind of transform this to look a little different, because we're all coming back to something different. If we're going to change something, let's try it. Let's just to make it an experiment and say, hey, we want to try this with your family. If you love it, we're going to keep doing it. And I think it's kind of a fun kind of trial period for families to test this out and see what it's like, having the familiarity of this was our online video. We were doing something like this at home. Now we're just going to do it at church with all the community of families around us, allowing for the social distancing and for families to stay together in their family unit. So, and eventually, after more of the restrictions lighten, we will continue to dismiss from kids to kids church from that family service. So the beginning of the service would stay as the family-centered service, and then kids would come to kids church and parents would stay for the sermon. So it's kind of exciting that we'll have some phases. It's a process for everybody. So we'll see how God carries us through each of those stages. But
that energizes me so much, because like God is at work, and this is an opportunity for the church to reevaluate and to think differently and to kind of move with what God is doing. And I'm so excited to hear that your church leadership is open to rethinking and to being creative in those ways, and really addressing families and learning from our experiences. And I love that it's a both and, that you can continue your video lessons and what's been working as you transition into something new. That seems really wise. Sharon, I know you have been spending a lot of time thinking about this lately. Fill us in. What's your church doing?
So we started outdoor services June 14th, and it's a family style worship out under a tent outdoors and everything. And God has blessed us so far with good weather every Sunday since then. We'll say it's been a little hot here in Minnesota, but we are on track to be opening on July 19th in Kids Ministry at one service. And there's just been a lot. We actually started a task force back in April, long before we had any plan of what reopening kids ministry might look like. And every week that team has been looking at all the things that we need to address. And I think that could be a whole nother conversation, because there's a lot that goes into reopening kids ministry and all of those things. But there's things are going to look different. And one of the big differences is that families are now going to have to register when they attend. You know, CDC guidelines require that you can track if somebody would get COVID, what class, who is exposed, and all of that stuff. We've never had families pre-register, except for like VBS, like to register, because we almost always fill. So that's a big change that will be happening. We are, looking at temperature checks and masks for when we come inside, for volunteers and staff for sure, not for kids. Although I just saw something come through on my phone that our governor is really close to requiring masks everywhere. So right now they're highly recommended. So we've just had a lot of looking at, we've measured all of our spaces to know how many kids we can fit in spaces. We're reallocating spaces that typically might not be kids ministry space, so we can welcome families back well and meet those CDC guidelines requiring more volunteers, creating new traffic patterns because hallways are only 8 feet wide, so you don't have 12 feet. I mean, it's a whole thing. But at the same time, God has been putting the right people in our path, and we've been doing a lot of networking and really listening to Jesus, listening to the Lord as to like, what do we need to do? What can we just let go of? And we've had some great communication with our volunteers, which I think is key. You need to be in conversation with your volunteers. We've stayed in touch since March. We've been having Zoom meetings, and you need to know the heart of your volunteers. And they have a lot of questions like, if I come back, what's that going to look like? How's it going to be different? What do I need to do differently? And so you want to make sure that you're bringing your volunteers along with you. We did kind of a launch the end of June outside barbecue just to kind of check in and vision cast what it could look like. And it was exciting because we also did some brainstorming. Bring your team with you in to help figure out the creative solutions for what reopening children's ministry can look like. But there's a lot to consider in that. And we also surveyed our parents, which was a huge eye-opening piece for us because we originally were not going to reopen until September 13th. And then we kept hearing things from families, and then Wisconsin opened up, and we're like a border town to Wisconsin. So we surveyed our parents, and 77% of our parents said they would come back to kids ministry and church the next weekend if we were opened. We were like, oh, we're not ready. We better get going. So yeah, surveying your parents is key too, though. You might be surprised.
And Sharon, I remember you telling me, so when you have your outdoor services with adults, that frees up space inside the building for kids. What does that look like?
So our kids ministry, except our nursery, is all down on the lower level, and then our worship right now is we have a huge backyard. Like we can socially distance 923 people because we've measured. So all of our adults will be outside. So then all of our spaces inside where adult classes, and we have like a youth area, that's all going to be dedicated to kids ministry so that when we do reopen, we can reopen well. And because we're starting with kids ministry at one service, we can take more kids but be socially distanced and spread out. And so everybody is, the goal is to be able to reopen kids ministry, but other ministry areas won't be happening in the immediate future so that we can open kids ministry at one service to start. And then gradually we'll get to 2 services. But we want to do it well. We want it to be a great experience for kids. We want kids to come excited. We want them to be, learning about Jesus in the same creative, exciting ways that we've been doing. And we want parents to be comfortable and our volunteers to be comfortable with the policies and procedures that we've needed to implement along the way.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of thinking through Simply Loved lessons too, and have been doing some adaptation videos that we can give tips for each lesson. And I think just some general ideas of physically distanced groups of children. First of all, just saying that makes me smile. Because the kids that I know, that is not their natural tendency. So what are just like containers and things that can help to reframe some of those things? And we noticed, kind of sharing individual supplies instead of shared supplies, instead of putting all the crayons in the middle of the table, have bags labeled with kids' names so that they can be using those. Creating space between kids. We've been saying arms out and eye-to-eye circles. If you're familiar with group in our VBS, we've had knee-to-knee circles forever. And now we have arms out and eye-to-eye circles to help create that distance, but still pay attention as people are talking. Utilizing smaller groups of crews, or having, I love what you said about volunteer sharing, to get them on board. Because if you can have a team of volunteers that's centralized around a small group of kids, that's a safety idea that can really help. And then I think about the activities that we write. A lot of times we have kids moving together in different places. So what if right now we move together less and individually more? So it's a lot more moving in place with our preschool friends, or acting out stories kind of imaginatively. And again, just don't worry about getting through every part of the lesson, even when you're gathered with kids again. Be wise, pay attention to your safety procedures, and do what will work best while you're gathered with kids. So Wendy, you mentioned earlier, you would keep doing the Zoom call, and your church has reopened. What are some things that you're learning now that you're back with kids again?
I think this part of this question probably doesn't apply to a lot of the people watching in regards to my response, because we are small, and it really is easy for me to have class. We are actually in a section of our church where we have a preschool program, which is not meeting. So we're the only people in that whole section. It's me and the kids that are in my class, and that's it. And so the room that we meet in, I did move into a larger room in that part of the building. And I have four sibling groups, 3 that attend regularly. So it's once again, it's not difficult for me to separate them, because I'll have on one side of the table sit with these siblings, and on another side of the table, I have the other siblings. And I know that they have started in our worship service. We are actually now grouping family units together to meet. So we actually will not be having children's church every Sunday. It's going to depend on how many children that we do have in the service. That there'll be Sunday. There's already been some Sundays that they just stay in the service with their parents. But Sunday school is available because I really can space them out during Sunday school right now. So we don't really have a problem at this point in time. Our governor has required masks. I have not heard from my church yet, so I don't know what that's going to look like come Sunday at this point. Because technically for us, it's wearing masks only if you can't distance 6 feet apart, and we're able to do that even within our church until our church, continues to grow more.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I love, again, God is at work, and he is at work in small churches.
Yeah.
And in our chat, there are people saying, my church is small too. My church is small too. Mine too, Wendy.
Awesome.
And having worked in a small church, I love that there are opportunities there too, that we can bring our kids together. And I think that that's going to be a really neat thing moving forward. The smaller churches are going to play a big part in what God's up to.
I think somebody had a question I saw that had came through about small churches being a church not being able to afford curriculum with the digital. And, not all the curriculum with group, it has digital content, and we're using a very affordable one with the Be Bold program. And I know there's others too through group, because we've used those where it's more workbook style. And so I'm just going to put a plug in there because I love the group material. We've used with digital, without digital. We've used the VBS. We've used the workbook style curriculum. So there's definitely an option for any size class, any age group, any program, any size church, wherever you are financially. You probably would even have a member of the congregation that would want to gift it for that quarter for the smaller program. So yes, so there.
You are a creative thinker. I love that. And even with our Dig In curriculum, there's a tiered cost structure. So it depends on how many kids you're working with. And so that's definitely something to check out there too.
Charity, I saw a question in the chat about how do you reopen in the nursery, and just a little bit of guidance on that, because we've definitely dug into that. I would recommend going to any of your preschools or early childhood centers that have been open during the whole COVID-19 for essential workers, because they have found ways to do it. We have reached out to a Christian preschool that I was actually on the board of directors for many years. They've been open. They have been a huge help because they have to follow CDC guidelines, and they were actually the group that gave us, one of our volunteers works at one of those Christian preschools and gave the suggestion of having parents drop your kids off and not have the entire family walk through your ministry area, because that minimizes exposure. So I'd recommend checking with your preschools and early childhood centers that are open, especially for ratios within nursery. Obviously, if you're holding babies and they're close to you, I personally would want to wear a mask in that situation, because that baby has no place to be except within your arms distance there. But really reach out to your local early childhood centers for direction, because they are a huge help.
That is a great suggestion, Sharon, and a great way for communities to work together.
Absolutely. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Someone's already figured that out.
Right, right. Well, I want to be mindful of the time. We were thinking that this would be about an hour, and I know that there are so many more questions, and I know that our team at Group is going to go through our chat questions and do our best to formulate responses and things that can be helpful to you. I think one of my takeaways is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of plan and answer to all of the questions that we have right now. But I do want to let you know that we at Group, we are friends who care, and we really want to help. And one of the ways that we've been trying to help is we put together some different COVID-compatible resources that can apply to a variety of different situations. So no matter what your plans are. So after this webinar, you're going to receive a follow-up email, and there's going to be a link to an online quiz. I've spent a lot of time with online quizzes as I've been bored at home lately, but this quiz can be helpful and purposeful, and it can help to match your church scenarios with different resources that Group has that could help to meet those curriculum needs, along with other goodies and resources and things that we've been putting together that can be helpful during this time. So I just want to thank you for joining our conversation today. Special thanks to Becky and Sharon and Wendy for your willingness to share your experiences. I can tell that kids and their families are blessed to have leaders like you, so thank you. And that goes for everyone that's joined us today. I can tell that kids and families are blessed by having leaders that are thoughtful and wise and discerning and following God's lead right now. You know, this morning I was working with our editorial team on writing a Simply Loved lesson, and it was the classic David and Goliath. And, you know, it seems like there are some intimidating giants that we're facing right now. But the point is God helps us, and he helps us do amazing things. It wasn't really that David was amazing or had all the answers, but he could trust God, and we can trust God too right now. So thank you for joining us. Know that we continue to be here to help, and God bless you as you serve his kids and families. Thanks so much.